Game books are back, friends, and they're better than they ever were. I'm old enough that I was part of the game book craze of the 1980s when we have hundreds of game books coming out. Everybody wanted to read them, but of course, we were young. I was like 10, 11 when I really got into game books. And so we were less discriminating and we were just so excited about the form that any story that would branch was good enough. Which actually means that the game book of the 1980s, while it was bigger in terms of copies sold than it is now, the game book of the 1980s was on average not particularly good, not necessarily designed with solid game design principles in mind. But now we have new game books that are aimed at families and or adults, and they just have higher standards from every point of view. And you can see that, again, now it's about either families or adults that can afford more expensive products. When you look at something like Endless Destiny, seems to be the title of a new series, and the first book in the series, The Clockwork City. So a fantasy work with a little bit of a steampunk aesthetic here and there. It is a game book that comes in a nice box, such as this one. And game books in the 1980s, they didn't come in boxes. They had to keep it as cheap as they could. So in the box, you're gonna find the game book itself, and it's not gonna show it to you too much, but I want to give you don't want to give you spoilers. Oh, here's my bookmark. But I wanna show you that it's nice and colorful. It has colorful maps. I'll show you the first one, so it's not too much of a spoiler. Nice maps that you navigate. The story is a fantasy story. It's perfectly fine, somewhat traditional, and that's okay. When I read a game book, I want to make interesting decisions. I don't necessarily look for the avant-garde. A classic fantasy quest is pretty fine by me. It's divided into 4 chapters, and each chapter, will have a main navigation map. So with different locations that you can reach, reading the corresponding paragraphs. As you can see, some are empty because as you discover where they are, you're supposed to write the number on it, which of course I did, and I'm not crazy. I wrote them on a separate piece of paper. And maybe sometimes there are also things that will cause you to relabel a certain entry. I don't know, I'll make a fictional example. Maybe you blow up a potion and now the Crab and Clock Tavern bursts into flames, and now it's like, oh, relabel that as entry 49, and 49 says like, that's a bunch of chair remains because you blew it up, kind of thing. 4 sections in which we go on a quest, and I'll let you figure out, if you decide to read the book, the specifics and details of Clockwork City. What is, again, unique is that this game book, like some of the game books of recent times, they really take advantage of the developments in game design of the last couple of decades, such as card-driven gameplay and deck building even. There was one that came out of last year. It was an Italian game book that was card-driven and deck building, but this is the first one that I know of in English. And again, you couldn't do this in the 1980s because you had to spend, printing the cards and making a box and all of that good stuff. So this is card-driven with an element, not a big one, of deck building. The deck building element comes in the fact that from time to time you will level up and then you can add these upgraded cards to your personal deck. And this is a deck of hero actions that you will use during combat. As you can see, each card has 2 sides. We'll talk about that in a minute. You also have a deck for enemy actions, and you have a Doom card, which is particularly important. Now, these cards are used when you start combat, and you will set up a card to indicate your health. Right now, say it says that I am at 8. Focus is a resource that you collect during combat, and again, you'll keep track of how much you collect and how much you spend to activate awesome effects. And hero status, right at the beginning, it may change if you are stunned or burning or immobilized or weakened, each with effects that are not good. Combat may start at melee range or at ranged range, and you have a card to indicate which one is which. So suppose that we're starting at range, they're throwing stuff at us. The enemy also has cards to keep track of their health. I want this to go to 0, so I defeat them. Peril, and this goes up, is bad for you. And again, status that you may inflict on them. When you start an encounter, say we found a certain monster, the encounter will tell you how much life points they have, so you set that up, how much armor they have, there's a token you need to remember, and then what is their combat deck. Suppose that I'm encounter a monster and the text says, oh, this monster has Doom, Bolt, Snipe, Blast, and Ensnare. And so I just make a deck like so, and I shuffle it, and that's how I set up, combat. Then I also shuffle my own action deck, and now we're good to go. When you need to resolve combat, each round of combat, you will draw 3 cards from your own deck, and then you will select actions for these. So you select which side of the card you want to choose, use, so different options there. Oh, for example, I can flip the distance tracker, remember, maybe I'm dashing toward the enemy or away from the enemy. I may parry, giving me 2 points of shield that will protect from 2 points of damage. I may spend focus so I can give particularly powerful damage. I will have on my character sheet items that are equipped, and if I use this effect, then I can perform whatever it is that the item does, and so on and so forth. And this one, for example, spend focus. So I will choose which of the 2 actions I want to perform for each card. And once I'm committed, only then will I draw a card here to indicate the action of the monster. And then I resolve the sequence of actions that have been selected. There's an action that lets me, foresight, lets me peek at that card, so maybe I can make decision here. Ideally, you will want to collect focus and then use it for some really awesome actions. Some actions will allow you to inflict damage. Suppose, oh, this one gives me focus. This one allows me to spend to cause 3 points of damage. And then I'm blocking, something like that. Again, if I give damage, I simply record it on the cards of the monster, and then I perform whatever it is that the monster does. For example, here, 2 points of damage at range, and 1 if I'm at melee, and maybe I was able to parry or block some of that. So, once you resolve all the actions in order, you will have adjusted your health and or the health of the enemy and or the status of yourself and or the enemy. And that's how you complete that round. Then you discard all cards, you draw 3 more cards for yourself. Oh, is the inside. 3 more cards for yourself, select the new sequence of actions and repeat until one of you is dead. An exception is if you draw the Doom card. Almost every monster has one in their deck. When you draw the Doom card, first you will reshuffle the deck of cards again, resetting the enemy deck. Second, you will increase the peril tracker here. Oh, I got 1 point of Doom now. 1 point of peril because I got the Doom card. And that happens again, and that happens again. And each encounter will tell you what that does. Usually, it ain't good. Usually, they get nastier, more damaging, they set you on fire more easily. There are some cases in which this is some really tough enemies that you really basically can't defeat. You just need to survive until the end of combat, so that also keeps track of that. So this is pretty much the timer of the game as things escalate. So, but this is the general idea. If you defeat monsters and you don't die, you'll collect coins, you'll collect fame points, which can be used for certain checks within the game. And again, by leveling up, you'll get better cards that will make it into your personal action deck. But this is the general idea. Read the game book. Sometimes, make decisions in the tree of decisions. Some of the times move on the map, or from time to time Oh, maybe I'll show you a single encounter. You'll see. Oh, no, not this one. Oh, maybe this one. No, not this one. Okay, fine. If you don't want any spoiler, close your eyes right now. I'm just going to show you what setting up a monster encounter looks like. And so you set it up accordingly, and then you play it following the rules that I showed you. And you continue until either you die, and then you're supposed to start from the beginning, or until you complete the mission of the Clockwork City. Clockwork City has excellent production values. They have to be some of the best production values that I've seen in game books ever. I love the art and those cards. They just look so good. Large tarot style cards. It's great color art throughout, great production values. The story is very classic, and as I said, I don't mind it at all. Not every game book that has to be as emotionally intense as Heart of Ice by Dave Morris. That's known as one of the most narratively powerful game books ever written. I'm okay with a fun romp in which I am exploring a fantasy area and fighting monsters and seeing what's next, solving some puzzles, solving some codes here and there. All in here. But when it comes to gameplay, I thought I had found the holy grail of game books. Because of course we had game mechanics in the classic game books of the 1980s, but they tended to be vastly random. And again, when we were 10 or 11, the idea of rolling those dice, so exciting, oh, the monster hit me, but I hit them. Although you were very often on an autopilot, maybe you spent a luck point here and there, but don't spend it too many, it was mainly luck-based. It delayed the result, and it felt like combat, it felt like a game, although there weren't many decisions. But here I have a game that seems to mirror modern game sensibilities, which have to do with agency. We want to make decisions. We want combat to be an outcome, at least in part, of choices we make. And this seems to be full of interesting choices. Each round I get 3 cards. That means 6 effects to choose from. I can choose to collect or spend focus. So many different things I could do. But the execution has a problem. The execution turned out to be very anticlimactic and disappointing. What I think the game could do, it did not do. Why so? Because there is a massive randomness in the hero action deck. Massive randomness, and a lot of different things need to go right to you to get a good hand. Let me clarify that. By a good hand, I don't mean a hand that lets you win, but a hand that lets you do something, a hand that actually gives you options. I'm all excited, and I'm getting, say, 2 effects that require focus, and I don't have any. Incidentally, I believe the first hand that I drew, that was precisely the case. You start with 0 doubt. Maybe those 2 don't require resources that I don't have, and the other one tells me, oh, you have insight, you can look at the first card of the enemy deck. But it doesn't matter because there's nothing I can do. Or the following turn, I draw 2 cards, and 1 gives me focus, and that's okay. And maybe I have like 2 weak attacks that are not enough to overcome the armor of the enemy. And so it's 2 rounds in which I didn't do anything. But now I have 1 focus. Meanwhile, the enemy gives me some negative, nasty effect, which you can remove by spending a point of focus. So I do that, otherwise I die. And then I get another hand of cards that require focus, which I don't have. Later I get a hand that only gives me focus and doesn't let me use it. So I was so excited about all the actions that I could do, but in truth, with this idea that a lot of actions need to be fueled by a resource that you may or may not have, well, sometimes I get the mighty attack, but it's at the wrong distance, it's range or melee. In practice, I found myself for most rounds of combat doing nothing. Looking at those effects, realizing that there was no combination which I could have done anything meaningful, and then applying the negative effect of the enemy. I would say on average, maybe I did something, every 3 rounds or so. Most rounds I was drawing those cards, nothing I can do with those, and taking a negative effect. So that was annoying and frustrating and such a missed opportunity. I think it's the first time I see this game system, so maybe again the game system needs to be tweaked or polished. I think there is a huge potential here, but I don't think this specific book showcases what a card-driven game book could do. Another option, tweaks that I thought about, maybe you could discard any 2 cards to collect a focus anyway. That could be interesting because you're giving up a lot of those cards, but you get some advancement. You're probably going to be able to at least do something. Or maybe draw 4 cards each turn and you'll still only use 3, and that one can be either discarded or maybe you can choose to put it at the top or bottom of the deck. But you need to give the player more agency because you have a game system that seems to be designed to put the players in the driver's seat, and it doesn't because you keep drawing, at least I keep drawing hands of cards that don't do anything. Another thing is the Doom tracker that resets the deck. These enemies have decks of 4 or 5 cards. So in truth, the Doom card comes out every 2-3 turns on average, maybe even more often than that. And it's a bit tedious to reset the deck so often. But most importantly, again, the peril goes up by 3 before sometimes I've literally done anything. Again, the idea is that I keep getting hands of cards that don't go together, and the peril tracker goes up, and I haven't done anything. I believe I died most of the fights of this book. Most of these I absolutely died, and then I said, "Oh, interesting," and it just moved on. I did not start from the beginning because, let's say, that I was playing in story mode. But I was still setting up every encounter and trying to see if there was something I was missing. If there's something I'm missing, please, I implore you, let me know. But I play as I understand the rules want me to play. And I found myself drawing cards, doing nothing, and seeing my hero getting pummeled by monsters. And that allows weakened the experience and made it a bit annoying, especially or more so because it seems so promising. I think there is a fantastic idea. This may become the awkward pioneer of the best line of video games, of game books ever written. But this is not showing the potential of what a card-driven game book can do, in my opinion.